Welcome back to She Asked, Tools for Practical Hope. I'm your host, Anna McBride, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a space where we rewrite the narratives that keep us stuck so we can actually change our lives, not just understand them, but live differently within them. And if you're someone who's been doing the work, reading, reflecting, becoming more self aware, but still feel like something isn't fully shifting, this episode is for you. Because today we're talking about something that sits underneath so much of what we experience: self worth. I'm joined today by Dawna Daigneault. Dawna is a psychotherapist with over 20 years' experience. She's a mother, partner, and lifelong student of the healing process, both personally and professionally. She's also a co author of a book on self worth, which has become a true passion project for her. Over the past decade, Dawna has devoted much of her work to understanding human worth, how it's formed, how it gets disrupted, and how we can begin to rebuild it in a way that feels grounded and true. She's developed what's called worth consciousness theory, a framework that helps people reconnect to a more stable internal sense of worth, one that isn't constantly being negotiated from external validation or life circumstances. Dawna, I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for joining us on She Asked.
Thank you for having me. That was a lovely introduction. And as I'm getting to know you, I think that you are also lovely.
Oh, thank you. Very
Yeah.
sweet. So, as always on our show, we like to begin with a story. So, Dawna, can you take us through your journey, both personally and professionally, and how you came to focus so deeply on self worth?
I really got into it's right around 2011. And I had clients coming in that would talk about not having worth, or they would say, I feel unworthy. And my worst cases would say, I feel worthless,
Mm,
which is just heart-wrenching for me to hear, because that the connotation of that is both a helplessness and a hopelessness happening. And so I started thinking about what that is. What am I hearing? How can I look at it differently so I can move into that space and offer something that would make a difference? And so the first thing I did is I wrote an essay called Ribbon of Worth. That was my first effort. And it was about a tapestry that is all the threads of our lives.
mm,
And that there's this one particular thread, and I called it's more like a ribbon because it is more highly valued and more noticeable if it's missing. And it's this ribbon of worth, and that it can get pulled through the tapestry effortlessly if we're in the right systems and really enhance the beauty of life, but it can also be pulled away from the other threads of life, and it can even fall below our feet and we can walk on it ourselves. And
wow.
so I wrote this up and I started handing it out in session to clients and just asking, does this resonate with you? Can you see worth differently? That it's not something that can be taken away from you, but it is something that can be ignored, or it's something that, and this is where my language shifted around this, it can be denied. So it doesn't go anywhere, but it can be denied so effectively that it drops from the rest of our life, and we can even be walking on it and harming ourselves.
Wow. I love that idea that it's always there, doesn't go anywhere, yet it can be diminished to such a way that we can walk all over it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that still gives you agency and that you can bring it back up. That's
Yes.
wonderful. And so you wrote this, you went on to write a book about this topic, so tell us more about that.
Oh, yes. I'll be honest. I wrote an app that came out in 2020, and it didn't do very well because it was boring. But what it did is I would sit on the floor in my living room and I would have these 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper that I got from our printer. I'm just pulling out of the printer drawer or on the pack. And I would write, this would lead to that. And I'd have these arrows. And so I was creating the pathways of if you feel disrespected, it goes this way. If you have a lack of awareness, you actually go down this path. And so I created all these paths that lead to self-worth,
Mm.
but it was too technical. It was too much having a therapist in your head. But the work was wonderful. And because I mapped all of that out, it was just weeks and weeks of mapping these pathways out where my clients start and feel less than worthy and how to get them and work with the unique parts of self-worth that were missing that I could move them towards feeling worthy. And I wrote a little companion workbook to that. Again, none of this did well, but it was wonderful preparatory work. I was in the stuff I love to think about and talk about, and I was committed to finding a way to talk about this with my clients that, again, would make the difference they needed. Because the models that I'd been trained in, they would point to worth, they would reference it. I started going over to half price books and picking up old copies of books I'd read in school that were referenced in school, like in those mega textbooks, because I knew Carl Rogers talked about worth. So I would go, and I could have gone to the library. I love the library, and I just want to say support our libraries, but I wanted to write in them. I wanted to get in and make them mine. And so I would go over to half price books and I would find Carl Rogers and Maslow and Frankl and Jung, and I would find these different masters and I would just start looking, where do they talk about worth?
Mm.
And so as I was pulling theory forward and seeing overlap in theory, some of it was counter to. I found that fascinating as well because you and I had talked earlier that a lot of people think self-worth and self-esteem are the same thing.
Right.
And some of these theories put them together and talk about them the same way, that they both go up and down. And I kept saying, I don't believe that's true. I know self-esteem goes up and down, and that actually makes sense to me, that we can't like everything about ourselves, and that's okay. That's actually healthy. But that when we do like things about ourselves and we hold those things, our esteem goes up. But our worth is separate and would inform that self-esteem, but doesn't have to go up and down.
Okay. As you were gathering this app, I think it's funny, this truly means there's an app for everything, right? Or that was
Uh-huh.
the intention to create that. And at the time that you were creating this app and gathering information about self-worth, did you know that you were gonna be writing a book about it?
No, no, I knew I was gonna work on this till I solved a problem.
Mm.
I didn't know how I was gonna solve it. I didn't know if I was gonna find a solution, but I was driven to understand it just because I knew the power of feeling a denial of self-worth in any system. It can happen anywhere. I remember I went to a 5th grade camp, and there was a girl that I was friends with that her mother ran the dance program, and I was in it. But because her mom was really well known, she was really well known. And I remember our names were being put on these little, I think they were called Bunsen burners. You'd make your own. And she suggested, I want to be called, and it was some really cool name. And the counselor who was putting her through, the camp counselor, knew her and knew her mom and put the name she wanted on her can. This was a big deal, right? Getting like a nickname at camp. And so I saw her make a suggestion for a cool name. And I thought, oh, I get to do that too. And so it was my turn next. And I said, how about, and again, I don't remember what I suggested. I just thought it sounded cool. and she did the opposite on my can.
Mhm.
And I just felt all the air come out of my sails.
Okay.
I didn't understand why that happened. I didn't understand why within seconds one person got the thing that they wanted and the next person was denied the
Mhm.
thing she wanted. And this doesn't hurt anybody.
Right.
And it wasn't a name that was like, I'm the queen of the camp and lord over everyone. It wasn't a ridiculous thing. And so that was one of those moments from my past where I felt treated differently. Such a
Yeah.
small moment with such a big impact.
And in a sense, I can even see that little girl at camp, that 5th grade camp, which
Yeah.
is such a tender time in development, right? In terms of our esteem, our worth in society, in that system anyway. And I think I could see the fragility of that and how when something is denied that was so easily given to someone else, I could see how
Mhm.
that comparison and it can be diminishing of self-worth. So take us back a little bit further because that was 5th grade version of you. Was
Right.
there a younger version of you in which self-worth, now that you're looking back through a therapist's eyes, was really being challenged?
Yes. Yeah. And I think what I want to say here as a segue is I've known both.
Mm,
I have had my worth affirmed. So my grandmother only affirmed my worth my whole life.
wow.
So being around her was wonderful. And I guess I want to give this positive story and then I'll tell a worth denying story. When we'd go visit her and she would get the brush out and brush my hair, I had long, fine hair. And she would sit and she'd say, we need to brush it 100 times
Yeah.
to make it look like silk. And she would sit and just brush. What a nurturing act. It
Right.
was connected, it was simple, it was invested. It was just about her seeing me and giving me something she believed in. She was a hairdresser, so
Okay.
she cared about hair and just this very simple gift of you matter. So that was most of my interactions with her were like that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Plus, she was a grandparent, so she didn't have to reprimand me. She didn't have to parent me. So, how wonderful that we have people in our life that get to mostly just love us. We're lucky if that's the case. So, that's what I think that's the initiation of the story of me knowing what having my worth affirmed felt like. And then the other story which I feel like became a much more severe narrative for me than I understood until I was about 17. And I was with my mom watching a made for TV movie one evening. So the movie was just a simple concept. It was set back at a time when social services were really starting to be available in bigger cities. And of course, the goal was to help families that were struggling. And there was a man who his wife was out of the home and he had these boys and he would have to go to work every day. And so they'd have to get themselves to school, come home and do a certain amount of self-care at home. And person in social services discovered this. And while the father was away, she came in and removed every one of those boys into
Mm,
state care. And he loved these boys and was doing the best he could do to raise them. But I think the most important thing for me watching that was he was fully dedicated to being a good father to the best of his ability. So then he spends the rest of the time trying to get them back. And you see the challenges he faces because there wasn't good record keeping at the time. He had lost his rights based on what was allowable in that state at that time. And so by the end of the movie, it's taken years and years for him to get every one of those boys back. So I started to cry when he got the very last son back who had been, and then the cry turned into sobbing. And then it was a kind of sobbing I had never experienced in my life, that there was lack of understanding of what was generating this immense grieving that I was experiencing. It was like a lifetime of grieving at the end of a movie. And I was just
Mhm.
a teenager, so you don't expect a teenager to feel that bad about a movie. And I didn't immediately tether it to what I saw in the show. And my mom became very concerned. She said, "What's going on with you?" She knew this was not common and probably not good for me, that this was indicative of something much more horrible than what we had just viewed. And it was. So it took me a while to unpack it. I kept thinking back to the movie and why did I have such a horrible reaction, a deeply felt pain at the end of that movie. And I finally realized there was a little girl inside of me that was wondering where my dad had been all that time.
'Cause your
I
parents were
didn't have.
divorced, right? Yes.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. My biological father left while my mom was pregnant with me.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and she had remarried, so I had somebody that was there and providing, and I had younger siblings, so I had a lot of normalcy, but I didn't know that my inner child was watching every father and daughter that she saw, and
Mm.
she would question in her head, "Where's mine? Why isn't he calling?
Wow.
Does he know where I am? Does he
Mm.
wanna know where I am? Like, why doesn't he wanna be in my life?" These were just piling up in my head, but then I don't know, "Donna, do you wanna make chocolate chip cookies?" I would shift to chocolate chip cookies, which I
Right.
still love, right? Or it would be time to do homework, so I'd shift to homework, or a friend would call. So I could shift out of that questioning, but then when I saw the evidence that a dad could do anything, they say move heaven or hell to
Right.
go get those people back in his life, that to me was so destructive.
Wow. Yeah, I
Mm,
think, what's interesting to me listening to you share, thank you for sharing that, those parts of your personal journey. It certainly helps me understand what really drew you to want to explore self-worth later. So when after you went through these experiences, you were 17 when you watched that movie, you were in 5th grade when you had that experience at camp, and then even younger when you had the lovely connection with your grandmother. When did you know that self-worth was gonna be something that you wanted to better understand and heal or help people heal from?
yeah. Probably not until my 30s.
Okay.
After all of that happened in my teens, again, it took me a while to put the parts of my story together to understand that I felt that I wasn't worth his time or his
Mm,
love or his effort. And then part of me believed that. So when we see evidence of denied self-worth and there's no good reason for it, and we don't have enough self-awareness to process it in a healthy way, we hold it as evidence against ourselves.
mm,
And so I had this little bit of evidence that maybe I'm not worthy, which is so many of the people I work with. It has shocked me as a clinician to discover these gaps of understanding of self as worthy, that when we drift into them in our sense of self, they hold us and they make us afraid and they make us reactive and they make us hide.
yeah, I can so relate to that. I
Mhm.
certainly never understood until for myself until recently, just how affected I was by these experiences in my life where the young version of me was having a hard time being able to understand why my parents were a certain way, why I came from a large family, why certain members of the family seemed to get more, or my mother was really doing service a lot in the world, and so it was like I there was one version of her that the world got to see, and then there was the version that we had at home. And the young version of me created this story of my worth based on this other person's behavior. And I think I in an earlier conversation with you had mentioned that some of your clients that had spiritual connection had a different understanding or maybe less gap or something of understanding about self-worth than the people who were more secular. Can you speak a little bit about that, how that was experienced?
So I immediately go to the reality I've seen in the people I work with that for some it's less, but actually for some it's more.
Mm,
And so for those where the gap is less, they've been told that their worth comes from a higher power, that there's a source greater than them. Oftentimes it's a creator of them. There are, say, verses that they've learned in childhood about God seeing the worth of a soul and making human beings, and so putting a certain amount of worth into something that God has made. And so people that really buy into that and believe that can be a guardrail, that can be a safe place in your mind to get back to and say, if a higher power is the creator of me in any way, then I must be worth something. It's very comforting to think. The really big negative from that thinking is that when you've been told that, but then the practices and the system you're in, whether it's in your family or in a larger organization like a church or a community, then I think of the Scarlet Letter almost immediately, like that community had a way of disavowing just a few people of their worth without really learning the whole story. So the
right.
person didn't matter, only the perception of the person mattered. And I think that's where we make a huge mistake as human beings. Let's just lean into this idea of being spiritual beings. And if that's true, and if there is a higher power that's been involved in our development at all, our creation at all, then if that's true, why are we not treating each other better?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
we forget that we're all come from the same source. And I was thinking as you were sharing that before you asked the question that so much of what is gapped is the way we do disconnect or not or connect within our societal system, right?
yeah,
Within our political system. There's so many stories of today of people who are diminished, disenfranchised, disavowed because their skin color is different than whoever is talking. And so, yeah, so that's referred to, if I'm saying hearing it, the lost worth story, right?
yeah, a lost worth story. And,
Mm,
and even though I don't believe worth can be lost, if a person does,
mhm.
that's the scariest story that they write and keep in their head. Oftentimes, it's been written for us before we even know who we are.
Yeah, we inherit this
Uh-huh.
worth story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about in one part in the book because when I get into a subject, I want to understand all facets. And so I was like, okay, how does this start? Where does this start? Where does worth start? And it's a concept.
Mhm.
So if we step away from like a deity endowing us with worth, which I love, I'm like, please be true. But if we step away from that and we deal with just the physiological, psychological reality of being a human being, what we see, especially in attachment theory, is that from the first year of life, we have signals going off inside of us.
Mm.
And those signals are wiring the brain and the body to trust each other. So when a baby is born, their tummy rumbles and they cry. And so when the tummy rumbles, the brain is picking up a signal from the tummy, and then it signals the mouth to make a sound. And then this really cool thing happens with attachment. If a caregiver knows to investigate that, to learn what's true for that person, they will try several things to quell that cry. They'll pick the baby up, they'll bounce the baby. So they'll try comfort. If that doesn't work, they'll check the diaper, a different kind of comfort, but still comfort. And then they might, oh, are you hungry again? They'll
Right.
try feeding you. And so then what the brain and the baby learns is that when I signal with my mouth about what's happening to my tummy, somebody picks up on that signal and responds, which is where trust is born. That
Right.
is where trust is born. And that's Erickson's psychosocial model. The first year of life is trust versus mistrust.
Yeah.
What if worth is born there as well?
Wow.
Because what we talk about is when that signal is responded to, how is it responded to? In Romania, the awful stories, and in China, the awful stories of not having enough help in the orphanages, and the babies are hungry and they have enough bottles. So they have resources in food, and they take them and they put a bottle in the hands of each baby. But the baby's farthest away from the nursing station. When their bottle falls out of their hands, that is the end of their feeding. And nobody is there to pick that bottle up and help them get that need met. That's a life need. So we look at Maslow's life needs. That life need has to be met. Food, shelter, safety has to be met. But when a self-worth need, so we've coined this phrase, when a self-worth need is not met and a life worth need is met, you start learning you're not worthy really
Oh,
early.
wow.
But when
It's
both aren't
really
met,
powerful when you think about it because, as you mentioned, it is inherited generally. And I'm thinking of my parents, but parents who come from trauma, right? And they are having to attend to babies' needs and probably basing it through the lens of their experiences that they had, and which would lead to quick overwhelm and or an inability to attend or notice or even acknowledge the need versus what which was never talked about, worth. That's not
right?
something that I grew up even thinking about or considering until now. It seems like it is so important. However, as you said, what if it's formulated in that first year of life?
Yeah,
Makes it even harder to go back and heal, I imagine.
yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes the new normal. So I love Stephen Hayes. He's the creator of ACT, which is acceptance and commitment theory. I love his adjustment to a phrase. He took practice makes perfect and he made it so therapeutic. He says, no, because perfect isn't good for us. Practice makes permanent.
Ooh, yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense to me as because what we do on a regular basis creates our reality.
it does.
And if we're telling ourselves the story that I'm not worthy, that's gonna be what we live.
It is. And there are degrees. I was fortunate that I had my worth affirmed. And by more than one person, there is research that shows if you just have one person who sees you, one person who cares about your experience in the world, it makes a huge difference.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I believe that's about self-worth needs. Not that we need to go too deep in this, but we talk about quadrants. And the quadrant that I mentioned is when life needs are met, but self-worth needs are not met. That's quadrant 3. But below that is quadrant 1, where life needs are not met and self-worth needs are not met. And Gabor Mate went out in Vancouver and looked with that
Yeah.
population. He talks about it in his book. It's the In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts is
Yeah.
that book. Yeah.
Yeah. And when self-worth needs and, life needs aren't met, then I think according to him, that's where the child becomes predisposed to addiction and other challenges in life, and it's quite interesting. So you noticed in your clients this difference between those that had a connection with a higher power and felt able to stay connected to their self-worth, more so than those that either did not have a belief in a higher power or weren't given enough information or enough connection with someone that validated their worth, that they struggled more with that. And what I'm wondering is when you saw that difference between the 2, what did that inform you as a therapist to be able to do to help them shift or change?
The first thing that I started to realize is why are we not that kind of person for other people?
Mhm.
If they need something that's unseen and really unknown, so it's hoped for, it's believed in, you can have faith in it, which is again beautiful, but it's way out there.
Right.
So it's got to be so far from us. Why? Why is one of the greatest sources of feeling worthy so placed so far away from us? And I think it's because the people around us don't know how to validate it on a consistent basis. And so I thought, Dawna, be one of those sources. For
Mm,
every person that comes and sits with you, do you honor their worth while they're in your presence? I was like, I can. I
mhm,
want to. And that started to matter to me because I do have so many people that have either left their family or left their church community because they felt abused or were abused. I shouldn't just say felt or were actually abused. But it doesn't mean that they didn't want something supportive of their sense of self on a universal level. This is where Frankl talks about a life rich with meaning and his ability to transcend the concentration camp he was in. I loved his book, Man's Search for Meaning. I read it several times. It's a hard read. I don't recommend it to everyone. It can trigger trauma, but he when he got through all of that, and what I believe the existential psychologists and philosophers were focused on doing is how do we not repeat this horrific scene ever again, this
mhm.
horrific event in human experience. And a lot of the people in those concentration camps were wondering where God was. And
Yeah.
again, it's man's inhumanity to man. Like, how are we embodying something greater or more beautiful or more sustaining? How are we not trying to pull that, I'm going to say essence, into self to flood life with more meaning
Mm,
for
yeah,
everyone?
yeah, and in a sense, building it more within ourselves. Right.
Yeah. So
So
it's not so far away.
yeah, bring it closer to you. Bring it closer to you by I hear a phrase in rooms that I'm in that says, "Let it begin with me." And when we begin to do the thing that we want to have more of, it attracts it to us. Now, I wanna talk about the worth conscious theory, all right?
Okay.
So could you talk about that a little bit in as simple terms as you can so that our listeners can understand better how to apply it or what it means?
That was just another thing that developed through sitting with clients. One way that feeling a level of unworthiness shows up is self consciousness. And that's a term that's been around my whole life. So you can become self-conscious, but it's not a good thing. And as I was looking at what is consciousness, and it's an awareness of awareness that has workable pieces, so we can personalize it, and that's where healing happens. And so I was like, okay, if consciousness is that, that's really good. So self-consciousness is bad. How did the combination of those two things become such a bad experience? And it's being conscious of judgments and denied self-worth and cruelty and unfairness and all the ways human beings move against each other and deciding that's what you get. That's your
Mm.
life experience, right? And so little children will immediately start saying, I could have done that different if I had been nicer, if I'd been quieter. So we learn how to fawn in childhood. Some of us, so actually all the defenses show up: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and then another one that they're talking about nowadays is flop, which is total dorsal collapse.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that.
So yeah, that's in some of the trauma training that I've done over the last couple of years. I'm hearing the term flop showing up more consistently. And fawning is a really dysfunctional version of pleasing, but it's a way to stay out of trouble, or it's a way to not be a problem. So you're not being yourself and you're not feeling worthy because the condition is don't be a problem.
Yeah. I find it interesting that self-consciousness, which was a label that created through in the societal system and a patriarchal in a sense, because at least at the time that I recall it being really prevalent, it was a time when children were meant to be seen and not heard, and that if the respect to an elder was commanded, demanded, and that girls were considered pleasing if they were quiet and followed the lead of the patriarchy. And I think it's interesting that that's when that label came about. When really, when you break it down, as you said, you have the self, which is all of us, the individual, and then you have consciousness, which is universal, and I think like it's just almost getting the universal to the personal level, which
Mhm.
is a good thing. And
It could
yes,
be.
but you mentioned in terms of acquired worth. So acquired worth is what we take on, correct?
Acquire values.
Pride values. Okay.
Acquired values. There's inherent values and acquired values. Good memory.
Okay. Explain the difference between the 2.
So again, this was just another facet that I started noticing was problematic. And the first thing I started thinking about listening to clients is that there was like a civil war inside of them, like
Mhm.
this internal civil war. And I was like, what are those opposing pieces inside of them? And I started calling them competing values. And then as I started looking at those competing values, I started realizing the fight was between values that were inherent to that person that take time to learn. Like you don't have a set of values at birth.
Right.
You're learning that your tummy can tell your brain, and your brain can tell your mouth, and your mouth can tell your caregiver. That's what's happening early. And then eventually you learn the word no by age 2, usually, right? So some more communication happens, but like you don't get your inherent values right away. They come over the length of those developmental stages. So we paired developing the inherent self-worth needs and the inherent self-worth values over the birth to probably in your 20s is when you have a full sense of self. They say empathy doesn't fully develop until age 18, and I promise you empathy and words are connected.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. So inherent takes quite a few years to
Yeah,
develop. And
it's
so
just about self.
it's about self. Okay. So it's
Yeah,
understanding who the self is in
yeah.
these different settings, systems, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like this version of us at all these stages is accounting for worth based on the connection and if our needs are being met, if we're feeling validated or connected. It's so interesting to me how this can unfold
Yes.
and how powerful. I'm a mother, and as are you, and we play such a powerful role in the
Yes.
development of worth for our children. So it's really interesting. And so now, what I want to ask you is for those listeners that may be listening and feeling like their worth is constantly shifting based on relationships or success, where should they even begin to better understand worth or what they can do about it?
So we have a Facebook group called
Okay.
Understanding Self-Worth. It's based on material from the book. The book is geared towards mental health professionals. And what I would recommend is if anybody decides to get the book, please have a mental health professional that you're working with to help you unpack the things that are going to come up. This is not a book you read and say, oh, I feel better immediately. It's a book that you read, and in a paragraph, in maybe the second or third chapter, you go, oh, that triggered something.
Mm,
I have something to work on right there. And so we talk about the pillars of self-worth, and that if the foundation is self-worth as a birthright, you get it just because you exist, then these pillars can be built on that solid foundation: awareness of that worth, respect for that worth, esteem in that worth, and then confidence in that worth. And that if we are given an optimal situation growing up, we get to build those pillars. And eventually, in young adulthood, we put a capstone on it that's called realized self worth. I know who I am. I'm true to myself. I know my inherent values, and I know which acquired values from the system I can keep and the ones that don't, that work for me because they move against my inherent values.
okay. So for anyone who's listening that feels like they're not there, right? That they want to heal some of these maybe earlier life situations or relationships where they were either lost their worth or never really had it identified as something that they could heal from. What can we offer them as a
Mhm.
other than the Facebook that they can maybe do for themselves?
Okay. It is not repeating, I am worthy over and over
Okay.
again. It's not. I've had clients come in who have tried to do little positive affirmations, and they're like, I don't know why these don't work. And then they feel more helpless. So it's
Okay.
more about questioning.
Mm.
And I invite clients to question the rhetoric that's rolling around in their head. And
Oh,
one of my favorite techniques to do in the office, and this is one of the earliest techniques I do, is I take the word worthless, I write it out on a dry erase board, by the way. Be careful doing this. You've got to have a client that trusts you, because when I hold that up, the other person immediately starts crying
okay.
because they're afraid it's true.
Yeah.
When you have a lost worth story, you're afraid that word means you.
Yeah.
And so I'll hold it up, and then I will patiently wait with them as they move through the emotion that fear creates. And again, I don't do this in a first session. We have a relationship. And then I take my dry erase marker and I draw a line down the middle of the word, separating worth from less. And I say, worth less than what? And that's the
Mm.
first question.
Wow.
Worth less than what?
Yeah.
Another person? No. Respect? No. Worth less than kindness? No. They can't say yes to any of the things running around in their head they thought they were worth less than, because those things had been denied, and
Right.
consistently. And sometimes, like sometimes I'm with a client who's in my age range in their 50s. And they've been living with this psychological pain all that time. And when I start deconstructing the concept,
Yeah.
they're like, no. And then
Yeah.
they'll say, because I don't believe that about anybody. And I'll say, ah,
Yeah.
so you're not worth less than any of the things running around in your head. And that's the starting point.
Wow, I love that, curiosity. So really going back to your childhood, regaining that wonderful tool that we all were born with also, but we sometimes leave behind as a way to break apart this rhetoric, as you said, that's inside
Yes.
our heads. Wow, that's so great. So I think so many people have an understanding of what worth is as a concept, as it's just something that's thrown around a lot, but they don't actually feel it. Why is there a gap between that understanding and the feeling of it?
We have to be true to ourselves.
Mm,
So, one of the big concepts in worth conscious theory is that lived truth and self worth belong together and need to be congruent.
okay. So if you're
So,
not living the way you believe to be worth, that's a problem. Yeah?
it's more if I'm patient with someone who's hurting me and
Mm,
they're saying hurtful things and it hurts me. So, I can think of a few times this happened in high school, and I don't say what's true for me. Hey, can you, like, not talk to me like that? I didn't know how to say that, by the way. I
right.
didn't know how to say that in high school, but, "Hey, can you not talk to me?" Or, "Hey, I don't wanna stay for this conversation." If I'm not true to what I need in a moment,
Okay.
my self-worth is being denied by me.
Yeah. That's often the worst crime, isn't it? What
It
we
is.
deny ourselves because that affirms it to that self inside all of us that's waiting for us to live like we know to be true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So when we're out of alignment, we're not going to feel the worth if we don't speak up for what we need or what we're
Yeah.
worthy. Wow.
Yeah, if we're not telling the truth about ourselves to ourselves, that's where it starts. It's
Mm,
not that everybody needs to know everything about you. That it's impossible, and sometimes it's not safe. But do I tell myself the truth about myself to myself? I do. I
okay.
didn't. There was a time I didn't, and there was a time I didn't know how to.
Yeah. It is true. I think what's wonderful is that we're all capable of an expanded self-awareness and even an expanded self-worth experience. And it does begin with telling the truth and speaking up to yourself in a kinder, more gentler way as well in interactions. Oh, wow. This is so incredible. So you mentioned your first attempt at an app, and
Yeah.
I know that you have since been working on another one. Why don't you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, so there is an app called Worth Conscious Coach that's in development. It is for clients. So we would hope that people using it would have a professional that they're working with, just someone that they can be accountable to. It could be a life coach, it can be a therapist, or if they have a nurse practitioner that's been trained in some behavioral health, we would invite them to use it, and it's going to help them become more worth conscious because that's the antidote to being self conscious. And
Okay.
back to what I was explaining earlier, in my field, I had learned there was self-conscious or neutral,
Okay.
self-conscious or not. And
Mm,
that's not very attractive, self-conscious or not. And I was like, what song would we ever hear? What would we
yeah.
call this? And I was like, I don't want to be self-conscious, but could I be worth conscious?
Ooh.
Oh, yes. And that sounds delightful.
Uh,
Like,
yeah. And so this tool, once it's launched, will help people to apply practices and unpack that theory and put it to work in their life. Is that right?
yes, it makes the theory more practical, something easy to use on a daily basis, and it helps it become more personal because there are things for the user of the app to include that's just about them and what they need.
Okay. That's fantastic. That would definitely mean that there's an app out there for everything. So you'll have to make sure you let us know when that is launched. And since this has been such a lively conversation and we've gone in lots of different directions, please, I want to thank you for that meaningful conversation. How can our listeners find you and find out more about this work?
So I think the easiest way to find me is the website, which is understandingselfworth.com. And there's a hyphen between self and worth.
Okay.
So understandingselfworth.com. And there are resources there for professionals, and there's a page for individuals.
Okay.
And then again, our Facebook page, it's geared towards material in the book, which is more theoretical and about the healing process. And yet, I don't want to discourage anyone from seeing if it's useful to them. This is an inclusive model. Like when I'm asked about, you mentioned earlier, the disparities and the mistreatment of whole segments of people for over centuries of time, I look at it's inclusive because I can't think of anybody I would leave out. I,
Fantastic. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
We're all worthy of of high self-worth.
yeah.
And so the name of the book is? Yeah.
Understanding self worth,
Okay.
guide to worth conscious theory and psychotherapeutic practice.
Fantastic. Wow. That's so great. And we'll make sure we put that information in the show notes for our listeners. Again, I want to thank you for joining us on She Asked. This has been such a meaningful conversation to me, and I'm so happy you were able to be here, Dawna. Thank you. To my listeners, if this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear this today. And if you're ready to do this work more deeply, this is exactly the kind of work that I do as a coach. I support women through transformational changes by better understanding what lies behind that narrative, moving from awareness to real lived change. And you can find more details about the coaching in the show notes. This has been She Asked Tools for Practical Hope. I am your host, Anna McBride. Thank you for being here. And until soon, be well.